Hello, hello, hello. It is Dr. Tanji. Today is Thursday and it's about past a little bit past 5:30. I love technology until I don't. Welcome to another session of Let's Talk Power Live, where we talk about education and power in education in real and authentic operational ways. I always say this. People ask me all the time, why do you talk about power in education? Why does it matter? Education has imbued with power, just like every other profession and industry. Power is real, but we don't talk about it. We talk about power dynamics. We talk about there's an imbalance and we want to discuss power, but we don't talk about it in operational ways. And so that's what we talk about here on Let's Talk Power Live. But today is Thursday. So I want to talk first about what I'm thankful for. I'm having a few glitches tonight, so just bear with me and let's see what's going on here. There we go. I don't know what's happening, but want to talk about what I'm grateful for. And what I'm grateful for today is that we made it past all the crazy snow. It's pretty beautiful outside still. We had the snow shoveled. Our house is nice and clean. Things are safe. It is bitter cold, but we're excited that today the sun was out and it's starting to get darker later already. So that makes me happy anyway. What are you thankful for? Want to make sure that you always take time to be thankful. When you're thankful for what you have, it automatically opens the door for more. So take time to be thankful today. And let's get started with today's session. Want to talk about the brain a little bit, but I also want to talk about why you default to what we call control. Why do you default to control even when you believe in agency? We all say that we believe in agency, and we do on the surface, but we're going to talk about why we actually believe, why we default towards control mechanisms, even when agency is what we say is a goal. But as I do every week, I want to go ahead and share with you what power in education is all about. And then I'm going to share with you my definition of instructional power. So here we go. Education is the instrument of democratic designs, and it is no less the instrument of power. The control of information, the shaping of understanding, and the influence of judgment are critical elements common to democratic design, power theory, and educational philosophy. So that's what power in education is. If you have the authority position, you own the work, you direct the work, you shape and create environments and the relationships within those environments that is meant to help a child learn some things and learn how to do things, you're operating in power. So the question then is, what does that mean from an instructional standpoint? And I want to stop for a moment and be very clear. If you're an educator, and for me, an educator is at any level. We tend to say educator means classroom person, leader is not an educator. If you touch resources that impact the affordance or the constraint of a child getting a great education, then you are an educator and you walk in power. So let's talk about the definition of instructional power. Understanding instructional power. Instructional power can be understood as an educator's use of their state, district, and building ascribed job-related authority to afford or constrain a student's access to learning. That is my understanding of instructional power as I saw in buildings, as I saw in classrooms, as I saw at the district level, and as I see across the nation. Power is real, as I said earlier. It's real. And it is at work at every level in education. And a lot of times our students are the ones who are on the receiving end of power misused. and misappropriated and misunderstood. So let's go ahead and get into our conversation a little bit more tonight and what we're going to talk about. So here, if you have missed where we've been, if you have missed the conversations, if you've not been sort of following in a while, here's where we have been. Over the last 3 weeks, we've talked about how power shapes access to learning. There are critical decisions made. We talked about that when Dr. Mitchell Brookins joined us earlier in the month. And we really dug into literacy and the access of literacy that is shaped by decision making. Then we moved on to talking about good intentions. We have good intentions, but your good intentions don't really matter sometimes, because our good intentions are always shaped by our underlying actual beliefs, not the beliefs we say we have, but the actual beliefs we have. And then last week, we talked about systems and how systems reflect leadership decisions and beliefs. And we talked about that with Dr. Mary Rice Booth and her new work on contextual intelligence. And that's really a framework for where we're headed today. So I want to go ahead and get us talking about the rest of our work. So let's think through what shapes our decisions. I want to be clear about something. We have a lot of beliefs in education, and we talk about beliefs and we talk about the need to be clear, and educators at every level come into education with a set of beliefs, just like you go to any other profession. But here's the thing. In education, you have your stated beliefs and you have your actual beliefs. And if there is a gap between your stated beliefs and your actual beliefs, children are going to suffer. So if your stated beliefs are deficit framed, now I'll reverse that, back it up. If your actual beliefs are deficit framed, but your stated beliefs are affirmed or affirmatively framed in the positive, your underlying beliefs, your actual beliefs in deficit are what's going to show up. And a lot of times in our educational settings, there is that differential between what a person says they believe and what a person actually believes. And that is showing up in the way kids get taught. It is showing up in the decisions that adults make, and it is really shaping the experiences that young people have. So that is what I'm talking about here. So what shapes our decisions? And before power becomes policy or practices, it lives in your memories. We all have power memories. The thing is, the challenge is, very rarely do we stop and take stock of what they are. We don't stop and go, where did that decision come from? How am I being triggered by someone's behavior or someone's statements? What's happening there? I want you to really think through all of that. What might you be susceptible to because you have not taken the time to take stock in your power memories? So let's be clear about something. Power is learned. It is not neutral. We learn it through our early experiences with authority. We learn it when we feel safe, or we feel that something is risky, or we feel that there's reward involved. And those lessons, they don't disappear. They stay in your long-term memory. So even if you have said you come into education and you want to help kids and you want to make sure that kids get a great education, but somewhere in the back of your mind, in the recesses of your long-term memory, you are holding on to negative power, authority, relationships, and histories and memories, it's going to come out in the way that you respond to student behavior, the way you respond to certain statements and certain languages that kids use. It's going to come out when kids are from different backgrounds than you, from different socioeconomic statuses than you. Maybe they come from different states, they speak different dialects than you. Your power and your understanding about power are shaped by your memories. So If you're here with me tonight, fantastic. Thank you so much for being here with me. If you're new to the Let's Talk Power Live family, thank you for being new. Hit the subscribe button. If you're a return visitor, thank you again for being here. But here's what I want you to do. Either you're doing this live with me right now, or you're going to do it at some other point when you watch this. I want you to stop for a moment, and I want you to think about the first time you learned about power. Were you at home? Were you at school? Were you at church? Were you at a community event? Was there an event that shaped how you understood that somebody has authority over you and they're using it in ways that are positive and move you forward? Or are there ways of holding you back? Those are the ways in which power begins to take shape. I tell this story and I laugh about it. My sister and I were born in a Black Baptist church, and my mom, as well as all the other ladies in the church, had power. These ladies were no nonsense. They loved us dearly, but they did not mess around. And we understood who had authority, not by the words they said, but by the body language. And whenever I run workshops and professional learning sessions, and I ask this question, raise your hand if you learned about power at home, everybody's hand goes up. We all have memories about who was in charge of our lives and how power was mediated in our young life or adult life. So that is the ways in which power begins to take shape and the ways in which power begins to hold memory for us. But here's something else. Power is as much biology as it is sociology. We think of power as just a sociological phenom, right? It's a construct of sociology. It is actually biology first. It begins in the brain. And it begins in the limbic system, which is that part of our emotional center. And that is where it takes hold. Where most of us are familiar with, the various parts, the big body parts of the brain, our thalamus, our hippocampus, our amygdala, all of those big brain body parts. The limbic system really is our emotional system. And if you had, however you store and you related to your authority and your position, it is stored in your brain. And it is so stored in there that you will default to control, even when you say agency development is a goal. When there is a trigger and you can't name that trigger, it is living in the recesses of your long-term memory. It is living in the limbic system that directs your response, and then it's triggering your flight, your fight, your freeze response that lives in that little teeny tiny part of the back of your brain called the amygdala. So when we think about power, I want us to take a much more comprehensive and a much deeper understanding of what's happening. It is biology and it is sociology. So the more you are able to pause and think through how you began to understand power, what was your relationship and your history to power, the better able you will be to disrupt some of the harmful ways in which you might be using it. I'm as guilty as the next person. I raise my hand and say, I had some very long-term memory relationships with power that when I went into the classroom, I did not perform well when it came to my power dynamic. I call myself a reformed power protector. And if you've read Understanding Your Instructional Power, you know exactly what that means. As a power protector, I had to really stop myself and think through some of the dynamics of how I was hoarding power, how I was making decisions about students' access to learning. They learned, they performed well, but there were some relational dynamics because I had a very specific understanding about the way in which power moves. I really thought through power through the adult student relationship and really held on to a tight way of understanding that. And it wasn't until I took time to really think through it that I really began to understand what was going on. And I was able to disrupt the automatic way in which power was showing up. So let's continue our conversation about this. And so we already said this, like power has memory, right? Power has memory and memory has power. So when we think through how power gets scaled, and when I say scale, and I know we love the word, we're going to scale up, we're going to scale down. Sometimes we don't want to scale things. We don't want to scale the misuse and misappropriation and the misunderstanding of power. But when we share power, right, our share powered histories become our norms. When we do not examine the way in which we understood power, it becomes the norm of our interactions and it shapes the environments and the relationships, right? Our norms then become our policies and our routines, even when we are committed, at least in words, when we say we are committed to agency development, unexamined power dynamics and authority frameworks are going to translate into the way in which we build policies, into the ways in which we understand who has value in our learning environment and who does not have that value. And then our routines become that statement that says, well, this is just the way we do things. This is how we do things here. And we want to make sure that when we're talking about young people, when we're talking about children, we are willing to disrupt the automatic ways in which we make decisions. We want to be able to hit that pause button, and we want to be able to take more stock in how we understand the ways in which our policies are being written and the way our practices are being lived out in the experiences. And if we don't take the time to disrupt that, we are going to find the learning environment that's going to be different than what we say we want. There's going to be a gap between what we say we want and the environments we actually create. So this is why control is often an adaptation. It's an adaptation because it can feel safe. When the pressure mounts, and this year we are already at the end of January. I didn't even blink. I didn't even have a full blink. I did not have a full blink, and it is the end of January. So control is often an adaptation. It is an adaptation of the ways in which we have responded to long-term power relationships and our authority frameworks that we have not examined. So when control can feel like safety under pressure, that's when it's an adaptation. Right now, you're facing some pressure because you probably had some days off that you didn't account for because it's been snowing across the country. So you have a loss of instructional time. You're thinking about your upcoming assessments. How will you as a leader make sure that your teachers have enough time to plan, to instruct, and will your students get enough time to learn and demonstrate mastery? So we have a lot of pressure in the cooker right now. And when we're in those pressure situations, our amygdala is keyed up and it is determining whether or not we should we should flee and get on out of there, whether we should just be frightened and stay, or whether we should be frozen. And in those moments, how you understand your position, you heard me talk about position, ownership, work, environment, and relationship, how you understand your position as leader of building, leader of district, leader of classroom, how you understand that. And if you have not examined it, this is when your power becomes control as opposed to distributing, right? And then silence, keeping things into yourself or not being as transparent about decisions, that becomes your protection. You begin to hold on and be quiet under the guise of, I'm processing. If your processing is blocking transparency, you're probably power protecting. I'm saying it again. If your silence is blocking transparency, you're probably power protecting. And then compliance can feel like success. As long as people are doing what you want them to do, then you feel like you are on the right track. There are times for sure where compliance is necessary. Sometimes you just got to do what has to get done. But if that is the default button, you are leaning into power protecting, which is going to then create disenfranchising. If compliance is your default button, particularly this time of year when things are feeling more pressured, if you're leaning into compliance, you are probably power protecting, which is going to then lean into disenfranchisement. Make that clear. That is how control is often an adaptation of learned response. It is a learned response over time. So, what is the cost of all this? There is a cost, right? There's a cost of unexamined power. So, what goes unexamined gets reproduced. Adult control gets prioritized over student agency. We're going to advantage adult comfort over student agency. And then compliance mistaken for culture. You're going to get a sense, or you're going to believe that they're sort of doing what you say is the culture. And then control gets mistaken for your care. I want to talk about that and be really clear, right? You're thinking about all of these structures now that are going on. How is it that you can avoid paying the cost for unexamined power, authority relationships that are disrupting and leaning into disenfranchisement? Want to make sure that you're thinking through this idea of, let's not hold on to control. Let's find ways to distribute our power, right? We don't want to privilege adult comfort over student agency development. And that is easy to do this time of year because you're feeling a squeeze, particularly when our high stakes assessment seasons feel like they're tomorrow because we've had some days off because of the snow. And if your district does not go right automatically into learning, right, remote learning, if it doesn't allow that when school is called off, then you're feeling very tight and you're feeling squeezed. The natural response to that is going to be that you're going to lean into control mechanisms. So what is the remedy? What do we need to do about that? So let's take a look at what are some things that can also happen, right? Tell me if any of these things, as you're thinking through, and maybe you're joining me later or you're right with me right now, if any of these items sound familiar to you. That you tighten expectations when uncertainty rises. You might be doing that. You explain less and enforce more under pressure. That is your control response. Maybe you default to what feels efficient instead of what feels relational. Again, these are the high cost responses to unexamined power dynamics, unexamined power histories, and unexamined power relationships. This is what you might end up doing. So think through if any of these sound like, you know what, I might be doing some of that. Let me pause for a minute. Let me think about what I should do to get some relief, if not relief, but maybe get a way to think more critically around your own relationships and histories with power. So I want to talk about this. Avoid the trap of moving too fast. Here's the thing about educators, and we know this to be true. Educators are doers. We are doers. We are all about, I see the problem, I want to solve the problem, and we want strategy after strategy after strategy. I cannot tell you how many times I do professional learning and development, and the one thing people will say is, what am I going to do tomorrow? They want a strategy that they can just plug and play. I, along with a former colleague of mine, call that strategies. We're moving too fast before we take time to examine. When we're talking about our histories and our relationship with authority and power, what you can do tomorrow is slow down. Slow down. Stop for a moment and consider what is necessary for you to disrupt some of these patterns that might be causing a negative impact, inadvertent, on your environment and in the relationships. Even when you are committed to building student agency, building educator agency, you might really be defaulting to unexamined power, authority, relationships, and histories. So, what does that mean you can do? I'm so glad you asked. Let's go through the power moves that I normally give every week. So, here we go. Let's talk about some power moves. Power move number 1, interrupt your reflex. This is the pause button. What does it look like? Number 1, I want you to notice when the control first shows up. What's going on? When you feel it, you feel it in your body. There's a thing that happens inside your gut, right? Your gut is your second brain. Something happens in there, right? And I want you to name the trigger, not the behavior, because if you name the behavior, you remove yourself. Name the trigger that's causing your response, and then pause. Hit the pause button. What's that going to do? It's going to reduce your reactive decision making. Hit that pause button. Next up, shift from rules to reasons. Explain the why and the expectations. A lot of times, as leaders who lead districts and buildings and classrooms, we go straight to the expectation. Back up, explain the why and the expectation. Invite inquiry before compliance. And if you have to get to compliance, go back to bullet number 1 and explain why. And then make meaning visible. Help those that you lead understand and help them see it. Help them see it. That's going to build your trust, and it's going to maintain needed structures. This is not about a free-for-all. I want to be clear. This is not about a free-for-all. It's about building trust. And a few sessions back, we did an entire show on the high cost of low trust. So you want to be leaning into building trust. And then power move number 3, design for agency on purpose. Last week with Dr. Rice Booth, we talked about design for agency at the system level. Want to go a step deeper, design for agency on purpose. Design for authentic student and adult choice making, both. Protect your environment, especially when pressures mount. When pressures start mounting, the default button is to tighten it up and it creates exposure that is harmful to the environment. So protect your environment. That is the building, that is your department, and that is your classroom. Protect it, and then resist reclaiming that control to maintain your own comfort. If you are a power protector, a micromanager, this last bullet is going to be toughest for you. And you've got to take the time to really wind down, step back, and think this through. What's this going to do? It's going to move agency from rhetoric to reality. We love to talk about agency. It's student voice. But student voice and agency take design. And you have to design for it so that everybody's on the same page about it. So those are our power moves for this week. I want to make sure that you are really leaning into that. And one thing I forgot to ask, if you are new to Let's Talk Power Live, please go ahead, hit that subscribe button, like, and share. Would love to have you be part of our subscriber family. So, as always, we end with a couple of things. I got a gem for your journey this week, and we have been really leaning into our Instructional Power 101. If tonight's conversation resonated with you and you're leaning in and saying, you know what, I've been thinking about my own relationship. I've been feeling this twinge. I want to go deeper. I want to explore this idea. Instructional Power 101 is your exploration tool. It is a 7-module self-guided learning experience. And when you walk away, what we talked about tonight will be visible, it will be real, and you will have the strategies after you've done the work. You will have the strategies necessary to disrupt the harmful ways that you might be using power. And I'll tell you this, you're definitely going to understand and know your power history and your relationship with power. So go ahead, scan the QR code, go ahead and type in the link. If you're interested, if this has been resonating with you, Instructional Power 101 is the tool for that. Let's recap tonight. So here's what we know. Systems reflect beliefs. Beliefs are shaped by experience. Examining power memories mitigates misuse. Examining power memories mitigates misuse. Power is always at work, and reflection isn't retreat, it is regulating your reality. You want to regulate your reality through this. So it's critical that you examine your power history. I want to look ahead. It's Black History Month. I am so excited for us to kick off Black History Month with my friend Damon Harris from the Bond Project. You're going to definitely want to be here next week to join me and Damon as we talk about the Bond Project, kick off Black History Month, and talk about the power of community and Black male educators. So be with us next week. As always, you know I'm going to ask you, do you have your book? Get your book, get your book, get your book. Everything I talk about when it comes to instructional power, power and education started from my work inside the book. So that is the book. Go ahead and get it. And again, always, thank you so much for joining another session of Let's Talk Power Live. Be thankful on purpose. Good night, everybody.